Hey, welcome everybody to this Off the Cuff. I'm your host, Chris Martinson, of course. And today, very special change in venue. Have an old guest back in a new format. So we're doing Zoom now. We got the video going. We're going to be welcoming back Mish Shedlock. Mish, not only are we welcoming you back to the show, not only are you on Zoom, but you don't live in a, let's call it a tax hellhole anymore, or whatever we're going to call it. Tell
I
us.
have escaped a tax hellhole for southern Utah. It's good to be out of Illinois. I've been
Yep.
here about 3 weeks. Pleasure to be back on the show with you, Chris. And it's a pleasure to be out of Illinois. And by the way, for those who might have missed my post a few weeks ago, it takes 3 weeks, Chris, to leave Illinois because that is how long it takes to get a one-way U-Haul out of the state. Quote, everyone's leaving the state, unquote. That's what a U-Haul representative told us.
So how do they get the U-Hauls to Illinois? I'm curious.
That's a good question. I think they might pay you to move one back in. I'm not sure about that, but I am sure you get a reduced rate if you are going the other way, but very few are. And people are escaping California, by the way, as well, and New Jersey. And people have more reason to escape these states. I don't know if you saw this. This is quite crazy. But a California legislator wants to put a wealth tax on Californians, and he wants it retroactive for 10 years. So if you leave the state of California, they want to tax you for 10 years afterwards. Fancy that. And in New Jersey, a group of professors, what else, right, have gotten together and they said, you know what, New Jersey needs to raise taxes. And of course, Illinois is already doing that, so which is why I left.
Oh my God. You know, it's hard to not notice the pattern here, though, which is that a lot of the Democratic states are in a lot of trouble financially, that their response seems to be to raise more taxes rather than to figure out how to cut services or do something like that. And a lot of Republican states, I think, are picking people up. Most recently, Joe Rogan, takes off, I guess, from California and flees for Texas because, gosh, it's not just a little bit of a difference. I think top rate, 13.5% in California for state income tax. That's a pretty big difference to zero.
That's a huge difference. And they want this wealth tax now on top of it. I suspect that would be struck down on the courts as illegal, but God, who knows? You really don't know how courts decide, any issue. But retroactive, I'm sure, or for 10 years forward, I'm pretty certain that provision would be struck down.
Yeah.
I had a post up on my blog a few days ago, and I was talking about where apartment buildings are, where they're building more of them and where they're building less of them. And you might imagine where that would be. Places like Austin, Texas are building more and more of them, and places like Illinois and California are building less and less of them, I believe for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have that. Plus, we have the great flight from the cities. That was something I wrote about a long time ago, over a year ago now, where I predicted that people would be leaving cities, but mostly because I saw this tax thing coming and loss of services, and everything goes in a pendulum. So cities had their heyday, but you could just feel it coming for that reason alone, for taxes and things like that. But also because I thought people would slowly start waking up to the idea that cities aren't really a great place to live overall. And so I thought there would be this back to the land movement. Then you get COVID, and that just put really afterburner rockets on that sort of thesis. And now, Mish, I have friends who live up the Gold Coast in Connecticut, which is anything on the rail line. Properties are selling with multiple offers in 24 hours anywhere outside of New York City, as long as it's on a metro line, because I think people want to keep that connection into the city. But and now there's tens of thousands of apartments that are unfilled and unfillable in New York City. So do you see that as like just a blip, and COVID goes away and people forget about all this and wander home, or do you think that's more permanent?
I think it's permanent. I think a lot of things are permanent. Some of them are amusing and minor. For example, I was reading on the Wall Street Journal today, as people couldn't cut their hair, but the barbershops, the beauty salons, all that was closed, and so people perforce got used to not dyeing their hair. And guess what? Now they've decided to go gray. They're going to let more of this gray show. They've done this so long. Even women, actually, especially women, are now, said, phooey on this getting my hair colored every 2 weeks and having to tie every schedule, every vacation, every trip around getting hair colored. And that's just one of the interesting minor aspects of all of this. But more importantly, things like work at home is here to stay. There's going to be less business travel. Airlines, hotels are seeing a huge drop in the lucrative, portion of the travel. For airlines, that's the, first class business traveler that represented a smaller percentage of the travel, but a huge piece of the profit. And that's gone. Yeah, with places like Zoom, and we're on Zoom right now. Why not hold virtual meetings? Where my wife worked, they went to more Zoom conferences. I'm sure it's really, widespread. So, I'm wondering, it just took this coronavirus to give a trend that was already in place a jump start. Yeah. I don't think the coronavirus made changes. It just accelerated them in this regard.
Well, it didn't. Here's a big one. Well, first, it just put, again, afterburners on the Fed's desire to make rich people richer. So here they are just throwing money into the stock market and buying bonds and rescuing private equity firms and all of that. People forget, this whole Fed rescue started in September of 2019, months before any coronavirus was ever anywhere on anybody's radar screen. And there was a little company called Citadel, which is responsible for 20% of the daily trading in the U.S. Equity markets, where Ben Bernanke works, former chairman of the Federal Reserve. And they got in upside down on a basis trade where they were just skimming pennies off the difference between cash for treasuries and futures for treasuries. It was a basis point or two to be skimmed there. So they were doing that, just minting money for a long time. It goes upside down on them. And the next thing you know, the Fed says, we really need to bail them out from that. That would be important, right? Because God forbid Citadel actually takes a loss. That would be so unfortunate, right? And so they did that. And then they started, remember, like you and I were talking about it, they had like 500 billion tossed back in, and then Corona comes along. So really what the Fed's been doing, rescuing these markets, I think you have to rewind to Greenspan to sort of find the bones of this, but they were already up to here in it by December of 2019, right? So everything that's happening now to me is just a continuation of that, which is speculators and big, well-connected investors should take no losses.
A continuation, but to more extremes. Greenspan did a little of this. Bernanke did a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And now the Powell Fed that everyone wrongly speculated would be on the up and up and provide, some sort of difference, has stepped on the pedal and is doing even more blatantly illegal things, in my opinion, like buying debt equity funds. I mean, really, where does it stop? And Lacey Hunt had an interesting interview, and I hope people caught this. He's been one of the biggest bond bulls, and correctly so, for over 30 years. Bloomberg asked him the other day what would it get to make you to change your mind? And apparently it's already started in the UK. And that is, making the legal tender of the Bank of England debt, making their debt legal tender. Now, that hasn't started in the US yet. But I recall the day that happened because I was on the phone with Lacey, and he goes, "Mesh, do you realize what just happened?" Now he said, "Here's the word we like, Chris, temporary." He said it's
it's temporary.
When is this stuff ever temporary, Chris? Uh-oh. When is it ever temporary? Now, he doesn't think it's going to happen here in the U.S. I think it's going to. The question is when. He doesn't think it's going to happen for a couple more years. I defer to Lacey on that. I agree with him, actually. And maybe the Powell Fed is a little bit brighter than this. And look, they have at least avoided negative interest rates. And I think that they've looked at the Bank of Japan, and they've looked at the EU, and they said, you know what, negative interest rates didn't help them, so we're not going to do it here. But a lot of that has to do with, the Fed's modus operandi. Negative interest rates actually hurt banks. So that's probably the real reason they didn't do it. It's not because they don't think they can. It's because the Fed is beholden to the banks. In the ECB and Bank of Japan, it's a little bit different.
Oh, hold on. I'm not sure I understood what you said before. What do you mean Bank of England makes their debt legal tender?
I missed the change explicitly. I'd have to go look and see exactly what it was they did, because the change was subtle and I didn't catch it. Mm-hmm. But that was just Lacey's comment, and I'm pretty certain it's accurate. It's not direct financing. Let me explain it this way: when the Fed loans, it can't give money away. And I think his statement is implying that the Bank of England is now giving money away. That would be my translation of what he said. I missed the exact subtle statement that what the Bank of England did. But that's what he's warning about here is the Fed, being able to give money away as opposed to lending it. I think that's the root of what he's trying to say.
All right, because normally there's a one-to-one relationship that the Fed would print some currency and take in something as an asset on the balance sheet, right? Mm-hmm. Mortgage-backed securities, treasuries, corporate bonds, all this and that. But by the way, I just read this morning on Twitter, I didn't chase it all the way down. I got to look at it. But apparently, if I have the story right, there was a muni bond going off. It might have been a Port Authority bond, and it was being issued out at like 2.6% or something like that. And the Fed stepped in and said, we'll buy that at 1.8%, right? So they're actually just sidestepping the entire market mechanism, such as it is, which is already distorted by their earlier distortion, saying, that's not distorted enough. We think we'd like to pay above market rates for that. Could we do that? And where do we go from here? I mean, that's just crazy time to me. And I jokingly told Mike Maloney last week that I'm issuing CRIS bonds. They're the junkiest of the junk bonds. If the Fed buys them, I absolutely guarantee that I will not pay them back. They're dead in the water, right? You have to buy them above par. I'm offering them at 103.5. So the Fed should really like this. And I promise that this money will be highly stimulative. It'll make me much richer than anybody else around me. So it'll exacerbate the wealth gap, which I know Jay Pants on Fire Powell cares about a lot. So I don't see how I can lose. It's a good program, right?
It's a great program for you. Now, I'd like to do the same thing. My scheme was, I want to put an I owe me $1 million note in my piggy bank. And if I do that, I'll have another $1 million to spend, right? Because I will owe it to myself.
Yeah. You and Krug, call Krugman up. He'll tell you all about how it's not a problem because you owe it to yourself. It's just... It's all good, right? Come on, this is crazy time. We're in crazy time. I'm tracking so forget what the stock market is doing or not doing or what Tesla's up to or any of that stuff. When I look at where people are with mortgage failure to pays, when I look at all the stories I'm collecting of people going, I could go back to work, but I'm making a lot more not working, right? I just see that the productive output of this nation, truckers saying it's not worth trucking anymore. I can't possibly earn what I'm earning on the dole. I don't see any reason for us to get back to work anytime quickly, especially at the bottom of the pay scale. So this feels like a fairly permanent change that I can't see us getting around until well after the election. Because who's going to pull that piggy bank away? Before November?
Absolutely. But there's one thing that has happened though, and it's an important one. The $600 stimulus checks ran out on July 25th. Now, if you have a quick calendar there, how many weeks is that now? By my count, we've missed 3 checks? Or is it going on 4? This is real money that, like you said, I'm going to make a guess here that there's some 15 million people or 10 million, or pick a number out of the hat, because no one knows what the real numbers are. But there's 17 million people roughly that are not on, not collecting any state benefits, but that are only collecting pandemic assistance. And some of these people might be working part-time, but some of them aren't. So I don't know what the number is, but I'm going to guess 10 million for lack of anything else,
Mhm.
that have really no income at all coming in. And for these 10 million people, they're now in their third week of having no check coming in. I believe they're going to make this all retroactive, but I'm wondering how these bills are going to be paid in the meantime. And of course, we have all kinds of extension programs. People on in any federal housing program, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, whatever, have elected to skip a pay. And what's the number? Didn't we have like a record number of people, not paying their bills here now? Who cares? This is all taxpayer sponsored debt now. But I think we're in a crunch time here unless they agree on another COVID package. And I agree with the Republicans on this. It makes no sense to pay people more money than they were making when they were making full time. That's just crazy, Chris. But I also point out that Congress had months to figure this out and just sat on it, and now all of a sudden it's a huge crisis.
Well, is it really? So let's take it from a fairness standpoint. Let's say I'm one of these people who's been collecting the $600 in the PPP program, so I'm unemployment or whatever we're calling it. When I think about all of the private equity funds that just got bailed out, and I saw the Fed buying mortgage-backed securities literally for 103.5 on the dollar for mortgage-backed securities that ought to have been in the 90s, maybe 80s, because of all the people not paying mortgages, right? That's the risk and the price on these things ought to be coupled, and the Fed broke that. So they're just throwing billions and billions of free money at people who literally don't deserve it. If you speculated on a mortgage-backed security and it went belly up on you, tough, you lose money, right? Not in this world, right? So
yeah, they threw money at the speculators, not the real world. The Fed has no ability actually to target, the real world. This is why, 4 Fed governors now have come out and have been pissing and moaning. They want more fiscal stimulus. I mean, this is direct intervention into fiscal policy of Congress. And for some reason, the Fed screams loudly, and I've heard few people point this out, whenever Congress, interferes in monetary policy. The Fed is blatantly screaming and telling Congress what to do about fiscal policy. They can't give money away legally. The Bank of England now is somehow, but the Fed's avoiding that, but they're calling for Congress to do just that. And, it's, I don't know, from the standpoint of the frontline worker, the person deemed critical that has to go to work, say you're at a grocery store or in the medical industry, a lot of these people are making, minimum wage or barely above it. And you got, other people who are just fortunate enough, to work in a restaurant now making more than they did when they were working full time. So, I mean, talk about fairness. It's brutally unfair. And the response from Krugman is, well, who cares? That's the response from that end.
Yeah, but I'm very sympathetic to the argument that seems to be bubbling up, which is that, well, the wealthy and well-connected just give themselves bailouts whenever they want, and it's in the trillions of dollars. And then, but when it comes time to like giving money to the little people, it takes time. They drag their feet. It's complicated. But when they finally pass the rules, like this whole last thing, the CARES Act, come on, Mish. We all knew that it was going to be just a lobby and giveaway, and it was, right? Like you look at the list of firms that tapped into those PPP loans, right, which are going to be forgiven. It includes money management firms, all these firms, including like Barry Ritholtz, like all these like people who had
Yeah,
no
and
business.
Ritholtz was particularly galling, for the amount of for his political standpoint where he stands on all of these issues. And now, well, okay, when the bailout applies to me, I'm all in favor of it, right?
Yep, yep. So I think that really it did expose a lot of things, but I got to tell you, so if we could, you know me, I'm not political at all, and I don't really follow it all that closely. But I do think this November is going to be a barn burner because no matter who wins or loses, half the country's deeply disappointed. There's all kinds of opportunities for this to be irregular, shall we say, mail-in things.
Both sides.
And both sides.
It's
And by the
hard
way,
to say, people
the whole
are
time I've been saying to
complaining
everybody
about fraud, and you know what? They both might be right depending on what state they're in.
well, the electronic voting states, those are completely 100% unverifiable, been turning in completely BS results the whole way through. In fact, I will tell you again, once again, I don't think there's any possible way that Joe Biden legit beat Bernie Sanders. Not this again, I'm not saying I prefer one candidate over the other. But when you looked at how many people were showing up for Sanders, same as happened under Clinton, there are thousands and thousands. He's packing stadiums. Joe couldn't even get 400 people to show up. And then they're like, oh yeah, people voted and they picked him. Like, no, that's not what happened. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Like Cameroon should be coming in and saying, you guys, we can help you with your election. So I think we haven't had verifiable elections in a long time. Our electronic stuff's a mess. The results that come in are statistically invalid. Now we're going to throw mail-in on top of that. I'm telling you, whatever fraud we had before, I think we're going to multiply it by some whole number. And it was already pretty legendary.
Let's turn our attention here to coronavirus for a little bit. We see the case counts slowly starting to drop, and the death counts really dropping here in the United States. What seems to be happening to me is we have this wave of mask wearing, and then this wave of it's all over. We don't need to wear masks anymore. It's starting to pick up again in Europe, but the death counts are coming down, I think, across the board in the U.S. and Europe. Are we treating the patients better? Why is the death counts dropping here? And what is the concern? And then I have one comment here on a tweet that somebody made today that I'm going to comment on tomorrow that I found really galling. So your take first, and then we'll get into my galling tweet.
All right, sure. I mean, my viewers are pretty familiar with this if they've been watching my videos. I've been trying to account for the fact that you see these spike in cases up April, May, March, and then they come down. And we see that for all sorts of different countries, right? Pakistan and London as a city area, New York, we see it for Sweden, we see it for Italy, right? Everybody's following this same path, right? An explosive exponential curve, and then this flattening out, right? That's part one. Part two, the deaths, that's just cases. Deaths, of course, followed that spike because early on, those first cases when we were going through it, we didn't know what we were doing. Awful stuff, putting people on ventilators, which we now know is a death warrant practically. And we didn't have methylprednisone or other things. In fact, we were saying, let's not use steroids. We didn't have all sorts of treatments that are available. In India, they're using hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin with great success, right? A lot of countries that have, anyway. So we've learned how to treat it better. The United States is still way behind the curve on this. We're sidelining what I think are effective treatments in favor of a vaccine or a big pharma thing or whatnot. It's a story that's going to be awful when they finally make the movie about it. I think it's mass murder. It's pretty bad. But the point here is that this is a really high R0 virus, 5, let's call it, and it just sweeps through a population. And then what we find is that or I'll say X, a bunch of people are pre-immune to this thing. Y, some people get exposed to this and then they don't develop antibodies, but they develop a T cell response. It's pretty robust. Z, you have some people who develop antibodies to this whole thing. And then on top of that, you have whatever mask wearing, social distancing, things that do help, right? So you put all that into a blender. I'm pretty well convinced that that first wave was the big wave. It's now endemic. So in New York, it didn't go to zero. Deaths are pretty close to going to zero, but you see 5, 6, 700 cases a day being identified in New York State right now, right? A long flat tail. So to me, this is kind of like, it looks like malaria now, right? It's here. It's not going away. You definitely don't want to get it. We've learned how to treat it better, but from what I'm seeing, because I can't account for how Pakistan's curve looks the same as London's, which looks the same as New York's, which looks the same as Sweden's. They all look the same. So the way I do account for that, Mish, is I say, you're seeing what happens when we've achieved some necessary level of immunity, herd immunity. And that's the curve you would expect to see. It's a theory, hypothesis, not totally a theory yet, but a hypothesis. But that's what the data is fitting right now. And so we are seeing an uptick in Spain, but you have to decompose Spain. Don't look at Spain anymore. They're not seeing an uptick in cases in Madrid. They're seeing them in the outer areas, which didn't have their first wave.
Right.
So the point is, everybody has to go through that wave. And so right now, the uptick in Spain is clustered along the northern areas where they had a very low first wave. So I think they're just having their first wave. That's it.
That's a good synopsis. That fits with my view. I know you're way closer to me than this, and you've provided a very valuable service to actually everyone with the videos that you've put out here on this. The tweet that got my attention today, and it's one, and I would say that it's actually the prevalent view on Twitter, was that coronavirus is so deadly that we don't even know. We have to test to find it to find out the number of cases. I'm misphrasing that. I don't remember the exact nature of the tweet, but people have been downplaying this. My gosh, Chris, we've had 175,000 deaths in the United States. We've had over 200,000 in Europe. And you know, and I know that these are undercounts based off of excess deaths. The excess death as of July 25 was 200,000 in the US. Most of those are COVID related. For people to just like downplay this and downplay social distancing, and it's just galling and irritating to me. Now, we can debate policy within reason to say, well, we should have done this, we should have done that, we should have been more like Sweden, but to just like dismiss all of this as if it's some big hoax that a huge number of people aren't dying, when in fact now, do you buy this stat? Because I do, that it's COVID is now the third leading cause of death in the United States, and to just downplay this and laugh at this with these little smiley faces as if this isn't happening. I'm going to blast that in a post tomorrow.
Well, yeah, and please expand it out too, because I think people are overly focused on the deaths. We've learned how to control the deaths, but this is a really nasty virus, and it doesn't just come in through a single receptor, and it doesn't just sort of do it. It comes in at 10 times or 1,000 times more effectively into human ACE2 receptors than any other species, which again leads me to think probably not natural. Different subject, but it's pretty bad. And it comes in through the neuropilin receptor, the CD147 receptor on white blood cells, on and on. 6 receptors now that it sort of docks and comes into cells. So what we do know is that 15% of all people, Mish, who are mild, there's some form of symptomatic, right? Mild to severe, but anywhere on that symptom scale, 15% of them have what appears to be either a long haul, sort of a bout with this thing, and or what appears to be possibly very long-lasting damage, possibly lifelong, right? Heart damage, lung damage, kidney damage, brain or neural tissue, right? That's nothing to mess around with.
For how long? I'm gonna turn sideways here.
These aren't dead people, Mish. But these are people who are severely messed up, right? And so for every million people who test positive, that's 150,000. You would at 15% where you're going. These people might have very long-term expensive complications that have to be dealt with. Either it takes them out of the workforce. It means that they have to be on some sort of lifelong treatment. So we got 5 million cases now, and what's that? 300. That's 450,000 people. 450,000 people who are going to be debilitated for a while. That's not good. right?
That's a lot. I want to be accurate. So here's the tweet, and it was by somebody named Carbon-Gate. COVID-19 is so deadly that you need testing to see if you have it. And with a whole bunch of smiley faces after that, as if this is funny. You know, Chris, I'm sorry. I don't think this is funny, and I don't think it's a joking matter. And for some reason, the people who are climate skeptics, of which I'm one, seem to be even more skeptical of COVID. I don't know how these things are related, other than I guess maybe some people are just skeptical of everything. And I think a healthy dose of skepticism is good, but we can't ignore what the actual numbers here are. And, you know, 200,000 is a lot of deaths, and then another 200,000 in Europe. And I don't know how many in India and other places that are
Yeah.
underreported. That's a lot. And then the disabilities, we're going to have tens of thousands, if not more, permanent disabilities from this. It's really a tragedy, Chris, a tragedy.
Well, it is, and it didn't have to be this way. And of course, you know, we've got Fauci and Redfield and all these people are so-called national health leaders, and they're like, well, just mask up and wait for a vaccine. Like, oh my gosh, Mish, we have all this data now that says if people have their immune systems tuned up, if you're low, here's flat out, you know, the big study in Israel, they said vitamin D3 levels in your blood, just vitamin D. If we just look at this, below 21 nanograms per mil, people had increasingly more severe runs with the disease when they got COVID-19, right? All the way on down to if they were below a threshold, they ended up on ventilators. It was just dose response. Above a certain level, they either had mild or asymptomatic cases, depending, right? Again, it looked to be dose dependent. So this is a very easy thing to do. Why, here's how many times, I won't even ask the question. Here's how many times I've heard anybody like Fauci or Redfield or anybody in this administration or anybody from the WHO say, the most effective thing you do is make sure that you have vitamin D. It's cheap, it's easy, make sure you got it. If you're unsure about how much you got in your system, go get tested, go do that, right? Get plenty of sleep.
And it works. I've got my own vitamin D story here, Chris. I had prostate cancer a whole number of years ago, and I went on my own, regimen, and my doctor did some testing on all kinds of things. He told me I was vitamin B12 deficient and vitamin D deficient. He wanted me to take shots. So I said, okay, why don't I try, pills first? He said, well, studies show that that doesn't work, that your digestive system will just chew it up and it doesn't work. I said, well, let's try it. He said, well, okay, take this amount. And he had me take a huge amount of vitamin D. And I go get tested again. And he says, wow, says, you have too much vitamin D. You need to cut this down. So, clearly you're absorbing this stuff, contrary to, this was a number of years ago. I don't know if research has changed or his just opinion was just flat out wrong. But I also went on my own regimen of various things. I started taking vitamin D, B12, resveratrol, indole-3 carbinol, and all kinds of other stuff that, and this was based off of a study that I read from the University of Wisconsin about a cocktail of indole-3 carbinol, resveratrol, and bromelain that taken together had a potential for curing prostate cancer. My doctor said, well, that would never work. Specialist said never would work. I said, okay, let's try it. So I had 2 tests, actual surgeries that are very painful surgery. I don't know what you call it, where they're
the biopsy,
sticking needles into you and drawing samples. And, my trend was like this, 0. Just after several months, this is not a recommendation. I'm not a doctor. I'm just saying what I did and what the results were. But, I think you need to be your own health advocate, because I think, I wonder how many needless prostate surgeries, we're doing. And again, this is not medical advice. So, all I'm saying is what I did and what the results were. I had several people email me after I did this post on that, similar results, Chris.
That's an amazing story, Mission, and it dovetails perfectly with exactly this thing, which is if we had a non-broken healthcare system, not a sick care system that treats broken stuff and does surgeries and laser stuff and all that, but said we're interested in helping you be healthy and not get sick in the first place. We understand that nutrition and making sure you have the right vitamins and supplements inside your body, right? So if you need zinc to complete some enzymatic processes, you need zinc in your body. If you're zinc deficient, that's not good. Selenium, et cetera, and so forth, right? So to me, like a healthy culture would just say, we know what baseline health looks like, and we can take a snapshot of that. And if you're deficient in a few of these things, your fingerprint, we can help you get those back up. Because we know, and this is all known, Mish, all known in science, that if you're deficient in things, bad things can happen, right? And so this is really clearly the case for COVID. But again, here's how many times I've heard any of our national health leaders or international health leaders come out and say that.
Double zero.
It's like they don't care about the health outcomes. It's like they have some other priorities in this.
There's no incentive in the United States to do anything unless there's a buck in it, except at the university level. This is one thing the universities are good for. They're willing to do a study like the one the University of Wisconsin did about this cocktail to help on prostate cancer. But the medical industry is not interested in that because none of those things are patentable. You can't go out there and patent resveratrol. You can't patent bromelain because it's just a natural extract from pineapples. You can't, quercetin. You can't patent these things. So there's no incentive to do any testing on this because there's no money in it. They'd rather, come up with something that causes a million side effects, all of which have to be treated with some other disease, than to come out with something that actually cures the damn thing.
Well, I get that. But when we look at somebody like Fauci, right? He's capable of reading the Israeli study on vitamin D, just like I did. It doesn't, in theory, his paycheck comes from the NIAID. Right. He doesn't have any particular reason to or to not, let people know about the best stuff. And by the way, his name is on a 2005 paper where they were investigating SARS and in the lab, because that broke in 2003 and was cured by early 2004 because it went away, where they had showed that hydroxychloroquine was probably one of the most effective things you could use, or that they had discovered in the lab to stop the replication of the classic SARS virus in cells. So he had that information then, right? And now there's like this big fight to like take it away and do all this stuff. But we've got tons of data, anecdotal data, they call it, right? And still, when they did choose to run RCT, randomized controlled trials on hydroxychloroquine, they always did it when it was guaranteed to fail.
Yes.
It's an antiviral. It has to be given early in the cycle of the disease. It doesn't help with part 2 when people have the cytokine storm and their lungs are shutting down. That's when they would give it, and they would say, "Oh, not only did it not help, but it might hurt." Like, of course, you're giving a compound to a very, very sick person when it can't possibly do any good, right? And so I look at all this, and this is just, Mitch, to me, it's just emblematic, though, of what's happening in this country, where COVID is exposed just how rotten this really is. That's rotten through and through to me.
What's your theory as to why this is from somebody like a Fauci that I can't come up with one? Is it just incompetence? Is he paid off? What's your theory? Why is this?
I think it's that his whole life has been just immersed in pharma, right? He's up to his elbows with Gilead. He's up to his elbows with the big pharma companies, and they have a point of view, and it's all about the next best thing. And all of pharma would rather say, geez, you got an old medicine off patent. We'd rather not use that. We have this shiny, sexy new thing, that we got.
Oh, yeah.
They
cost how much a dose? $3,000,
Yeah. And it only costs $1 or $2 to make, actually. So it was priced at $3,000. It's not what it cost. So big difference, right?
Is there anyone in the administration here, on the healthcare side here, that's saying anything that's worth listening to?
Not yet. Not that I'm aware of. Nope.
I
Nope.
don't know, Chris. Anything else on your mind here? What else is going on? We've talked about the bailouts, the bonds, what the Fed might do. The stock market. I mean, gold is interesting here. A little bit of a pullback here now, and these
Well,
mainstream
today.
writers, Chris.
Yeah.
I just got to say, 3 articles in a row from the Wall Street Journal that are totally clueless about what the driving force is here behind gold, and why it rates to go higher. And it's about distrust in the financial industry. Although that's propelling stocks higher, it's also what's behind the rise in gold, don't you think? Mistrust in the Fed.
Yeah, I gotta say though, the yes, I'd like to think that, and probably the highest, most highly correlated chart I have is between the price of gold and the amount of outstanding negative yielding bonds. So for some reason, remember for years, Mish, you and I, we had to put up with this for years. People like, well, gold doesn't pay interest, right? Like it was some super smart comment, right? Of course it doesn't. But now we get to say, well, at least it doesn't pay you negative interest.
Yes, 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 yes. And and I think people, and I commented about this recently too, where put just way too much into this Buffett thing. Oh, Buffett's buying gold. No, I'm sorry, Buffett did not buy gold. He bought 1/10 of 1% of something of Barrick Gold, and it's because it pays a dividend. And all my contacts say that probably really wasn't Buffett anyway. That was one of the people really running the show. Buffett's too old to be running things. So, I don't think it means that much. The counterpoint is, well, it's got people looking that way now at gold, even though it really isn't gold. You got to take on that. Is there any impact here of Buffett buying Barrick Gold?
It's it does it yes, because it opens the Overton window of polite acceptability for more people who might go, oh well, if Buffett did, maybe I can. And of course, the big thing for the gold bugs always is to say, well, what if these CalPERS in Norway's sovereign wealth fund, what if they moved 0.5% of their assets into gold? And oh my gosh, it would have to explode, right? So I think people are looking at that as sort of saying it's now institutionally maybe more acceptable, and that's a big deal if that actually happens, because institutions mostly are goose egg exposure to gold at this point in time. And so that would be a pretty fundamental shift if it happens. But, for me, this is a fourth turning kind of a moment in history, and people are losing faith in all sorts of institutions. I think that's at least part of the propellant behind gold. Forget the gold price. We know that's still heavily manipulated, and we watch the shenanigans daily in the paper markets, and there's all kinds of junk going on there. But underneath that, I can tell you that tons of interest in gold. Everybody I know in the gold business says that they're out of product, and it's just been snapped up. That really big people are actually taking delivery of this stuff now. There's a lot of smoke going on over on COMEX with the delivery schedules, and so I think there's a chance, Mish, that this year, 2020. There's a chance, it's no longer zero, of an actual delivery default over at COMEX. And so if that happens, whatever, the price will move. But for the most part, my
If
strategy
that happens, I
around this,
think the price will skyrocket.
yeah, that's right.
I suspect that that's not going to happen, but we'll see.
Well, it might or might not. I mean, they're going to have to really smash the price of gold to liberate some out of GLD's vaults. It doesn't actually have much, I don't think. It's held in a sub-custodian by the Bank of England, and who knows what they actually have. But my other indicators, I do a lot of target shooting, pew pew, right? And so I do a lot of reloading. And my normal bullet supplier, this is the component bullets, not the cartridge. They just send me the first email I've ever seen like this, where they said, we had 5 million bullets that finally came in. We thought it was going to take months to sell them. We put them at a higher price point. They went away in a week, right?
Yeah.
We got that. You got it's getting hard to find land outside of cities because people are already leaving and buying that stuff. The seed suppliers this year are totally got stripped out. My favorite place to buy fruit trees from is not taking orders till 2021. They got stripped out. So all of these things together are sort of a tapestry of data points that says there's a lot of people who've decided that they don't no longer trust the big things in life, like where their food's going to come from, whether they're going to be safe and secure, whether their money's going to be okay in a bank. You know, these are all things I think I see happening, but classic fourth turning stuff, right?
The most interesting aspect about gold to me is the fact that open interest actually, and I follow the COT, the Commitment of Traders reports every Friday, is that open interest from the managed funds, you know, that's the hedge funds, has actually been going down while the price of gold is going up. So a lot of hedge funds actually missed out on this rally, and you know, we're in a little bit of a correction now here. But you know, normally these guys, you know, try and play catch up. So the way gold normally works, at least when I watch the COT charts, is as open interest among the managed funds goes up, the price of gold goes up. When open interest declines, the price of gold usually declines. It's not, there's no one-to-one relationship here, because you know, the price of gold with the dollar index where it's at, gold's been at 400, 1200, and 2000. So, you know, it's not about the US dollar, which is the biggest misconception about the price of gold. But a lot of the managed money, you know, sat this out. And, you know, that's interesting to me, because I think there's a lot of catch up to do here. And that's going to, you know, that has a potential to propel the gold higher. And of course, what the Fed is doing right now, we know it's going to continue unabated. And if the jobs don't pick back up, which I don't believe they're going to, the Fed's going to step on the pedal even harder. All of this is a very, very favorable tailwind for the price of gold.
Yeah, for all the wrong reasons, I think, that we talked about, right? Because the Fed's going to do what we always thought they were going to do. And so here we are.
Exactly. But just more of it, and in more creative ways. You know, would you have thought that the Fed would be buying bond ETFs 6 months ago?
Nope.
I wouldn't have. I'm sorry.
Nope. And they're going to end up buying equities at some point, because, yeah, the Swiss bank did it. They're just going to push this till there's really nowhere left to go, right? But let me be clear about this. What the Fed is doing is not an extension of capitalism. It has no place in capitalism. It's actually communism. It's a small, unelected cabal of people deciding what the right prices are for everything, because they know better. They know what the right price for munis should be, the right prices for junk bonds. They know the right prices for every stock. It's pretty amazing hubris, right? I'm just a believer that these things don't work in the long run, that's where you get mispricings, not better pricings.
It can't possibly work. And I think Japan is the prime example of here. What they've cornered, what, 75, 80% of the bond market. What good has it done them? Can anyone answer that question? What good has it done them? I fail to see that it's done them any good. And in fact, you can make a case that it's done them harm, because it's left Japan, once the world's largest creditor nation, into, on a GDP basis, the world's largest debtor nation. What do they have to show for it? Nothing. A huge pile of debt, Chris. Huge pile of debt. That's it.
Well said. Now, I'm really pleased to be conducting our first interview / podcast from St. George, Utah to Chester, Massachusetts. Zoom is working pretty well.
It's working really well. I pressured you a long time, because, you know, when are we going to do video? When are we going to do video? So I'm pleased to be doing my first video here with you. I think this one went well. I hope it goes over well. Anyway, I enjoyed being on, and I hope to be back on soon.
Thanks, Mish. Really enjoyed it, and we'll do it again soon. And be well out there, and I hope the heat breaks and you can enjoy some nice fall temperatures before too long.
Thanks.